So we got to Sefer Yetzirah now, and as I said, some people date Sefer Yetzirah in the 3rd century. Some make it a little later. I personally think that at least the part of the Sefer Yetzirah that we'll see later speaks about the Sefirot. Must be from of a later period, because the whole idea of Sefirot here, it's not spheres or realms, but rather literally counting or numbers. The word Sefirah is from the word lispor, to count, and the way he talked about those 10 Sefirot is could be best understood when we think of the what we call the Arabic digits, or the Hindi Arabic digits of the system of 0 to 9, and not of Latin numerals, because this is the system which, in the basis of the decimal base, that allows us to count huge numbers with using very few symbols. So, and if he knows of that system, it must be written in around the 7th century, because that's the time where the system arrived from arrived to the Middle East. But anyway, let's go through the text. It is, like I said, Sefer Yetzirah is written like a Mishnah. ב-32 נתיבות פליאות חוכמה חקק יה אדוני צבאות אלוהי ישראל אלוהים חיים ומלך עולם אל שדי רחום וחנון רם ונישא שוכן עד מרום וקדוש שמו וברא את עולמו ב3 ספרים בספר וספר וסיפור. So let's break it down. First, it talks about I'm the equivalent here in 32 mysterious paths of wisdom. ב-32 נתיבות פליות חוכמה. That the text here is translated in a, not literally. So let me move it here. Here. Yeah, in 30. So that's the text. In 32 mysterious paths of wisdom, Yah. Now we have all these synonyms for God. Yah, the Lord of hosts, but in Hebrew it's Adonai Tzevaot, using the Yud He Vav He, the ineffable name, the living God. So they skipped here, the God of Israel, the living God, King of the universe. Okay, here it's not the exact translation. Melech Olam should really be eternal king, because the word Olam in the Bible means eternity. It's a definition of time, not of space. So eternal king. El Shaddai, omnipotent, Rahum, all kind, merciful, supreme and extolled, who is eternal, sublime and most holy. Now, in the Ashkenazi, in the Ashkenazi Sidur, I think you have those words, right? Ram v'nisa shochen ad marom v'kadosh shemo. Is it in Nishmat Kol Hai, like before in Shacharit of Shabbat? Lily?
I can't place it exactly, but it's definitely in there.
Right. It's your. I think it's. I think it's the Shacharit of Shabbat, and that's where I said that the liturgy. That Ashkenazi liturgy that goes all the way back to the 7th century or so, Eretz Yisrael is aware of the book. So God, when we use all these different terms, engraved His world with those 32 mysterious paths. What are those? What are those 32 mysterious paths? They are basically the 22 letters and the 10 Sefirot, the 10 digits, or combinations of letters and numbers, which, as we know, is the ideal way to create a password, right? You have to combine letters and digits. I'm saying that when you take 22 letters, you have infinite number of combinations. When you add numbers to it, not only it's infinite, it's also could create combinations that are enigmatic and not easily understood. The flood of names is part of what I mentioned before, that we see it more in the Chalot literature, that sense of being overwhelmed by the experience. Just as a person who is within the spiritual experience of being close to God, cannot stop speaking. So he looks at God and says, Ya Adonai Tzavaot Eloi Yisrael Elohim Haim Melech Olam El Shaddai Rahum Hanun Rav V'Nisa Shochen Ad Merom V'Kadosh Mo. It's like the one, like where do you stop? You can't stop because you have to keep talking. Uvara et Olamo, and he created this universe in 3 Sefarim, with 3 books, namely Sefer, Sipur, and Sefer. That's it. This translation doesn't belong. Okay. So the problem here that we don't know the Nikud, right? For the first 2. The last one is Sipur. And Sipur is a form that is rabbinical. You don't find Sipur in the Bible, but you find the verb Hashamayim mesaperim kevod el. The heavens speak of the glory of God. But the word is Sipur, lesaper, as a noun, Sipur, story, is a rabbinical one. So this is definitely the Sipur is the concept of the narrative, the telling a story. These 2, Sefer Usfar, are not clear. One of them could be Sefer, as a book, and the other one could be Sefar, from counting, Lispor. But could also mean Sefar as boundary. They're all related in Hebrew because the verb is one meaning, and that is the meaning of Safar or Siper is to limit, to draw a line. And when we count, we give a certain quantity. When we tell a story, we define what is happening. So we take the letters and we form letters, and we form words, we form a story. That's why they're related in Hebrew. So this is this is questionable. What is the exact meaning of Sefer and Sfar? This is just an assumption that those are the Nikud, the vowels for both. But we could see it as Besefer in the sense of to count, Usfar as to set a boundary, Sipur is to tell a story. Does it have a specific meaning? We'll see later, but could be for now a wordplay. So the number that we see so far in Sefer Yetzirah is the 32 paths and the 3 books. 10 ספירות בלימה ו22 אותיות יסוד, 3 אימות ו7 כפולות ו12 פשוטות. They consist of a decade out of nothing. Decade meaning 10 of, I would translate like not decade, but rather of 10. Let's keep the word sefirot, of 10 sefirot out of nothing, or I would say belima is suspended on nothing. ו-22 אותיות יסוד, so they have 22 letters which are fundamental, meaning that they are the building blocks of language. 3 imot, mothers, fundamental letters or first elements, and this is something that is unique to Sefer Yetzirah. The idea of 3 letters which are Aleph, Mem, and Shin, that are fundamental letters, is unique and is not clear where the author took it from. There are 7 double letters, meaning that there are letters you could be pronounced in 2 different ways, and 12 simple consonants. So 7 doubles, such as kaf and chaf. There are two ways of describing them. So 10 ספירות בלימה, 10 ולא 9, 10 ולא 11. הבן בחוכמה וחכם בבינה, בחון בהם וחקור מהם, והעמד דבר על בוריו, והשב יוצר על מכונו. Now all these Mishnayot of the first, like from 1 to 9 in the first chapter, start from 2. I will start with the term 10 ספירות בלימה. So where is this? 10 ספירות. No, I skipped one, sorry. 10 ספירות בלימה, מספר 10 אצבעות, 5 כנגד 5, וברית יחיד מכוונת באמצע, כמילת הלשון וכמילת מאור. The ספירות, the 10 ספירות out of nothing, are analogous to that of the 10 fingers and toes of the human body, 5 parallel to 5, and in the center of which is the covenant with the Holy One by the word of the tongue and the right of Abraham. Okay. Fine. I sort of counter on that translation, but it has to be so here's like what we said, what I mentioned already in the previous discussion, that that mystical literature can be very explicit, and the way we'll look at it here now, it says 10 ספירות בלימה, מספר 10 אצבעות. I'll put them parallel. The 10 sefirot are parallel to the 10 fingers, and in between the 10 fingers, when one put his hands down, the brit, what they call brit hayahid, the covenant with the only one, which is the brit milah, is in the middle. It's in the middle of the body. How does it tie to the 10 numbers, or the 10 digits, or the 10 sefirot? It's not clear, and but the author points out that there is interesting parallelism, that the lashon, the tongue, produces milah, words, and the brit milah also has the word milah in it. But the word ma'or is not a biblical word. It has to do with the word irva, incest, or nakedness. So the author could be maybe alluding here to the fact that when we think of nakedness, we think of the physical nakedness, but there's also a spiritual one, and a spiritual one comes about when we say things that we're not supposed to say. So he refers here to the power of the language. Maybe the analogy to the genitals is that they could produce life. When from a small seed can come a whole personality. But when we look into the idea of being exposed in a way, let's look at this pasuk in Ovadia. איך נחפשו עשיו נבעו מצפוניו. This is on Obadiah 1, 6 and 7. It says, how thoroughly rifled is Esav, how ransacked his hoards. All your allies turned you back at the frontier. Your own confederate have duped and overcome you. This is an example of someone who's being misled or misguided by the words of others, being betrayed, and then he's exposed. Is being exposed naked just by the word of others. So that is probably what the author is saying here. Later on, this in later mysticism was loaded with new meanings, saying that just as one can cause destruction with words that are uttered in an inappropriate way, so also could sow destruction by spreading or wasting his seed. And that was something that is also building on rabbinical tradition, which in turn was influenced by Greek science, but then later on was tied into mystical meaning. Remember, I spoke about how the Zohar would give mystical meanings to halachic statements. So there was a halachic statement made by the rabbis in the 2nd and 3rd century about wasting one's seed, and that was because of a certain understanding that they derived from Greek science, that is like killing new and destroying potential life. So they have the same thing here. Now here in the next Mishnah that I read before, we have this sense of mystery that we don't fully understand. We don't fully understand what is happening because it's always a certain message that the authors of Kabbalah, of Kabbalistic or mystical text are trying to convey to us, that there's so much more that we don't know. So we have here 10 that are not 9, 10 that are not 11. Be wise, or be intelligent with wisdom, and be wise with intelligence. Keep analyzing and pondering on them, and then you will be able to establish the thing with its clarity and the Creator on His throne again. So, how do you understand that this just last phrase, put back the Creator on His throne? What does it? What is insinuated here when we say return the Creator to His throne?
Well, it sounds messianistic to me.
Messianic in the sense of
Messianic,
yeah,
yes, absolutely.
yeah.
In the sense of restoration and the longing for something to come.
Mm-hmm. But so who's restored? But restoration of what? Is the restoration of the temple?
No, it's the restoration of God back to God's throne.
It's the restoration of God. So,
which seems a little odd, but maybe it has something to do with repairing the world. That some kind of imperfection has entered into the world, and so God is not completely enthroned. He's not honored as God by all. And, by doing this, we will restore the
right. So
all humanity honors God.
Right. So the concept is there already in biblical times. There's the idea of the whole world recognizes God as the only God, but that's tikkun olam, not for the sake of God. This is something that the philosophers, Maimonides, especially, try to reject. When saying that God is perfect and God is unchangeable, immutable, and that He is the same before the world is created, and there will be the same if the whole world will cease to exist. The biblical concept that says Az efoch el amim safa be'ura, then the whole world will recognize that God is God, or you will be the only king. It was always understood in biblical period as referring to the people. God is the same. God is always king, but it just the people need to recognize Him. But this little phrase here tells us that God is, as if it were, God is in exile. And now this is a post-destruction concept that can be found also in Midrashic literature. In the Midrashic literature, God, as if it were, is not perfect. God is crying. I think, Carolyn, maybe you took the Midrash class with me when I analyzed the text that speak of God is crying after the destruction. Maybe I could pull it up here. This is in Eicha Rabbah. Let me see. In Eicha Rabbah, the Ptihta, it's the introduction. I think it's 121. Here. God basically says after the destruction, God is crying, and Metatron comes to him and he says, "You should not cry. I will cry for you." And God here, it's in 122 of Eicha Rabbati, 124. Here, באותה שעה, that's after the destruction, היה הקדוש ברוך הוא בוכה ואומר, אוי לי, מה עשיתי? השריתי שכינתי למטה בשביל ישראל, ועכשיו שחטאו חזרתי למקומי הראשון. God was crying and saying, what have I done? I have bestowed my divine providence down in the lower world for the people of Israel. ועכשיו שחטאו חזרתי למקומי הראשון. But now I was driven out. And God forbid, Haz v'shalom, so God is speaking, Sha'iti s'chok lagoyim v'lag labiot, now people will mock me. That is very human for God to speak that way. And it says, Be'ota sha'a ba Metatron, at that time Metatron, who's the archangel, comes, and he procrastinates, he prostrates himself, ve'amar lefanav ribono sh'olam, ani evke v'ata lo tivke. He says, I will cry, you don't have to cry. And God answers, Amar lo, im en ata maniach li livkot achshav, if you don't let me cry now, I will enter, ekanes lemakom she'en lecha reshut likanes ve'evke. I will go to a place where you are not allowed to come in, and I will cry. So at all levels, I mean, this is a deeper level here, but basically what this text shows us is that already the rabbis, the authors of Midrash, humanized God by attributing to Him the emotions that they had after the destruction. But here, what the author of Sefer Yetzirah says is, you have the power to restore God to His original place just by meditating, just by putting together those broken pieces, like what you mentioned. But here they're not broken, by the way. Here it's just you have to connect to them. The idea of the broken pieces is a much later one. It's called Shvirat HaKelim, the vessels that were not able to contain the light of God when the worlds were created. It's a later concept, and it started before the Zohar with the circle of the Kabbalists in Cherona, but for now, it's still a revolutionary concept. It's human beings are being told that they, by the pure power of intellect, can restore God. So, on one hand, it's a tremendous task that they receive. On the other hand, there is an air here of, I would say, paganism, but anthropomorphism. And if we go back to the beginning of that unit, Eser belimot, Eser velo tesha, Eser velo achat esrei, right? There are 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. Those 10, which have to be the 10 digits. When the way we understand mathematics, right? If we count in base 10 and base 10, they have to be 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. It's like saying you have to have 22 letters because you use the Hebrew language, 22 and not 23, 23 and not 21. There's no deep idea here, but the number 10 is a nice round number, and so they cling to it. but it is presented in a way that is enigmatic. Then in the third Mishnah we say עשר ספירות בלימה מידתן 10 שאין להם סוף עומק ראשית עומק אחרית. As I mentioned before, that the one of the common elements of mysticism is the idea of contrasts, of tension. So here we have the depth of beginning and of the end. The depth here they call it the infinite. So really the idea of infinity is an idea that we could start comprehending with numbers. It's very difficult to understand infinity when you use Roman numerals, right? So how many X's, or you could use what is the biggest Roman numeral? It's a M for mille, right? For 1,000. So you'll have to put 1,000 of these to create the sense of a million. But when you use base 10, it's easy to get to infinite numbers. So the even that we know that they ventured into those areas, and in a lot of the midrashic texts that deal with exaggerated numbers, they don't use the number 10. That's why I personally think that this text is at least from the 7th, 8th century, and not as people say 3rd century. I think that whoever wrote it in a way that reflects earlier literature, which is not, if you're well versed in the literature, you could do that. I wrote a midrash in Toldot that people wrote back to me and said, "Where did you find it?" I composed it. So I think that the author of Sefer Yetzirah was actually lived after the introduction of the Arabic digits to the region, and if we find similarities between his literature and earlier liturgic literature, it is he derived from the liturgy and not the other way around. So, but that also supports my argument before that there's not such a great distance between theoretical mathematicians and mystics, at least at one level. So he looks at omek, depth or infinity of beginning and end, goodness and evil, heights and the abyss, east and west, north and south. So like Surah 10, 5 pairs of opposites, and again a series of titles for God: Adon Yahid El Melech Ne'eman Moshel Bechulami Me'on Kodsho Ve'ad Ad Ad, the only God, Lord God, the faithful King, rules over all. Okay. The next Mishnah, the appearance of the 10 spheres out of nothing is like a flash of lightning, being without an end. His word is in them. When they go and return, they run by his order like a whirlwind and humble themselves before his throne. What does this remind you of a certain text that most people should know? It's very similar to the description of a chariot in Ezekiel. This is literally taken from Ezekiel. So here is a technique of giving a certain text the air of an ancient text by incorporating into it biblical language. As I said, in the traditional world, this Sefer Yetzirah is attributed to Avraham Avinu, even though there's no evidence for that. Here in Mishnah Zayin, 10 ספירות בלימה, נעוץ סופן בתחילתן ותחילתן בסופן, כשלהבת קשורה בגחלת שאדון יחיד ואין לו שני, ולפני אחד מה אתה סופר. The 10 of existence out of nothing has its end linked to its beginning and its beginning linked to its end, just as the flame is wedded to the live coal, because the Lord is one and there is not a second one, and before one, what will you count? Would anyone like to explain part of it? What is the imagery that is conjured when you read that?
Well, it sounds a bit like the wheel again. We're talking about
Right.
Linkages, and then you have the arithmetic thing at the end. There's no number before one.
Right. There's no number before one. Theoretically, there is. Right. We go to a -1, or we go to fractions. Right. But in whole numbers, there's nothing before one. But when you complete, you go from 1 to 10, then you go back to the 1. So here's the paradox. I think it's interesting to comment that physicists and cosmologists today think of the universe as an infinite circle. But if we would have been able to reach to the end of the known universe, we will be back where we started. And it's not a flat; it's more like a circle, and that is the sense that this Mishnah conveys. You will always come back to the place where you started. I don't know that this is the best analogy, like the way the flame is wedded to the coal, but this imagery for me is more connected to the previous Mishnah. Just like the fire is very looking for a book. Just as the fire is very something very fast that you cannot fully comprehend, and you cannot. It's physical, yet abstract. This is a book called "Lend Me Your Ears," like great speeches. So one of these sermons here is. Sorry about the. This is the from the Buddha. He urges people to turn away from craving, and he has this fire sermon, and this is what he says: all things are on fire, and what are all these things which are on fire? The eye is on fire, forms are on fire, eye consciousness is on fire, impressions received by the eye are on fire, and whatever sensation, pleasant, unpleasant, or indifferent, originates in dependence on impressions received by the eye, that also is on fire. The ear is on fire, sounds are on fire, the nose is on fire, odors are on fire, the tongue is on fire, and so on it goes. So it seems like this imagery of fire, and that something that keeps on moving fast, and everything is consumed by fire, is that idea that is something that people experience where they are meditating, where sort of all their senses are of heightened awareness, and they feel that, and maybe that's how they relate the idea of kesharevet kshura begahelet, that they are on one hand they are in a very, very fast and agitated movement, but they are in one place, meaning they are encircled, they're not getting anywhere, but they are moving very fast. So that's sort of the paradox of this kind of feeling. I'm going to skip a couple of Mishnayot, and we'll get the okay. We'll maybe we'll do 8 as well. עשר ספירות בלימה, בלום פיך מלדבר, וליבך מלהרהר, וימרץ ליבך שוב למקום. שלכך נאמר ויחרות רצו ושוב, ועל דבר זה נכרת ברית. Concerning the number 10, keep thy tongue from speaking and your mind from pondering on it, and if your mouth urges you to speak and your heart to think about it, return. So, and again, this is something that might have to do with the way the experience of meditation, that just as I mentioned before, one has the urge to keep speaking, as we saw in Mishnah 1, all these titles for God, there are rapid succession. Now he says, but you should not do that. You should try to hold yourself, maybe in order to return, shuv lamakom, to return to where you are. Vimratz libcha shuv lamakom. I would say this is the moment where one cannot is afraid of being lost in the process of meditation. In Mishnah Tet, now he changes direction, and he says how God, with those 10 sefirot, with the 10 numbers or the 10 levels, he creates the world. So, Esel sefirot belima, Ahat, 1, Ruach Elohim Haim Baruch Umvorach Shmo Shel Chai HaOlamim, Kol Veruach Vedibur Vezeu Ruach HaKodesh. The first one is the Spirit of God. This is a term that is taken directly from Bereshit, from Genesis, right? Veruach Elohim merachefet al penei hamayim. Baruch umvorach shmo shel Chai HaOlamim. Like once he mentions Hashem names, he has to give the title. Kol veruach vedibur vezeu ruach hakodesh. So here's we already had the sort of an introduction in the first Mishnayot, but here it's said very clearly. Kol veruach vedibur vezeu ruach hakodesh. The articulate word of creative power, the Spirit, and the Word are what we call the Holy Spirit. This is the declaration of the author that has its basis already in the in rabbinic literature, that what we call a Ruach HaKodesh or Ruach Elokim, or the image of God that human beings have, is the ability to talk, the ability to communicate. We when we find in Bereshit, in the second chapter, the Torah says, "Vayipach be'apav nishmat Haim vayi adam leruach haya," and he blew life into his nostrils, and man became a living spirit. The Targum, the Aramaic translation is Vayi Adam leruach memalela. He became a talking spirit, meaning that the transition from non-human to human is done through language. And I think that this is, without putting mysticism aside, we could agree on the fact that what sets apart humans from the rest of creation is the ability to talk, an ability to communicate. I mean, of course, we understand better today that animals communicate at different levels, but so far we don't have a proof that animals are able to create some type of literature or legacy that they can transmit from one generation to another. I mean, so that is the statement here. Kol veruach vedibur vezeu ruach hakodesh, that the ability to speak. Think about it, this is the creative process, and it's fascinating when you look at language. Any language in the world basically uses the physical tools that we have of producing certain sounds, and gives those sounds a meaning, and from that, well, those disparate sound creates a language. And there is I read an article a while ago about the evolution of language that concludes with the article traces the development of language according to the theory of evolution, and says that the gene that is responsible for our understanding of language has been identified. It has been identified because of flaw, a certain family where kids had a problem with syntax, and then they found that one of their genes was defective, so they were able to isolate the gene which is in charge of language. But it's still unclear, according to evolution, how we made this evolutionary leap from non-language to language species. But the conclusion of the article is that we could say that the language created man. Language created man. Now, according to the Kabbalists, Ruach HaKodesh, or God, is identified with language. So if you take the scientific article and you replace the word language for God, because this is how the Kabbalists see language, then they would agree both on God created man. Or in other words, the Kabbalists saw language as the divine power. So that is the first stage of creation as described in Sefer Yetzirah. We'll continue tomorrow with the rest of this chapter and maybe a little bit of Safrut Echalot, and then we'll move, God willing, to the next period of mystical literature that is early medieval times.